We're going to crack on now with tonight's big interview. Now, as you may have noticed, the Tories aren't predicted to do well, especially well, at the upcoming general election. However, Dame Andrea Jenkyns thinks that a certain blonde-haired former Prime Minister might be able to change the course of events. And I mean, well, Liz Truss has her detractors, but maybe it's worth some thought. I'm just kidding. With plenty of seats vacant, Dame Andrea says the one and only Boris Johnson should stand in one of them. She says, and I quote, "We need him to help stop Sir Neilot, flip-flopping anti-Brexit, not knowing what a woman is Starmer, and Rayner from getting into power." Tell us what you really think, Andrea. Now, here to help us assess the merits of this plan is the former Brexit Party MEP and now a brilliant commentator, Annunziata Rees-Mogg. Annunziata, thank you very much for your company. I mean, where do you stand on this, Annunziata? Are you with Andrea Jenkyns? Do you think actually this could bring about a nice renaissance of Tory, values and frankly, support?
I think it would be absolutely ridiculous to bring Boris back to one seat at this time. However, does he have a part to play in an election campaign? Absolutely. We've got rather a charisma-free zone. I think Reform are calling this the immigration election. I'd call it the imitation election. Everyone seems to be trying to ape a former idea of Tony Blair or something very managerial and serious. And in fact, Boris brings a huge amount of life and he reaches part of the Conservative Party that other Tories do not reach.
Yeah, I mean, so would you recommend then that Rishi Sunak at least offers an olive branch and says, come on, come with us, join the campaign team? Because the whispers are, Annunziata, is that Boris is going to spend most of his time abroad.
Absolutely. And that is Boris's prerogative. And given how he was ousted from the party, one can completely understand that he might not want to help them now. However, I think he is actually a patriot. I think he is very supportive of his party and he is hugely loyal. That's one of the strengths he has always been known for, sometimes to his own detriment. And his party needs him right now, not in one seat, not running the campaign, but supporting in areas where his appeal cuts through and avoiding, like the plague, areas where he's deeply unpopular. He is like Marmite, so use him wisely, but that would be up to the local candidates to know and understand their electorates and where he might go down well and where he might not.
Yeah.
And then, Annunziata, I saw some polling earlier on today which indicated that for Conservative voters, immigration really is the top issue. And there's one thing I've never quite understood about Brexit Party reform-type right-wingers and the attraction of Boris Johnson. Because under Boris Johnson, we saw taxes rise to the highest level since the end of the Second World War. We saw sky-high levels of immigration, 750,000 in 2022, ushered in by Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, by the way. And he's a social liberal, whereas you're meant to be a social conservative. So what is the draw of Boris Johnson to people like you and Dame Andrea Jenkyns, who actually disagree with him on all of those things?
I'm not going to speak for Dame Andrea, but for myself, I'm not Boris's biggest fan. But it is undoubtedly true that there is a large proportion of the right of centre electorate that do find him an electable and appealing character to have either as their leader or representing them in some way. And I think that has to be reflected that, yes, of course it is immigration that is very important to many people. But the only way we can achieve that is to leave the ECHR. Now, Labour are completely and utterly opposed to that. The Conservatives have looked into it and keep failing to do it because there are all sorts of blockades in the way. What we need is a reformed Conservative Party, depending who holds their seats, who loses. At the moment, we have no idea. But Boris could play a very important role in supporting those MPs who have the right of centre policies that actually win elections. And we saw that in 2019, that the new intake from the northern so-called red wall seats, the Midlands and further north, really did have pretty socially conservative, anti-mass immigration, low tax, small government views. And those are the voters that Boris appeals to. It's also very socially conservative when it comes to what is a woman, a question that Keir Starmer clearly still rather confused about. I'm pretty clear on it myself. But if Boris can bring some of those voters to the ballot box and get the right kind of MPs re-elected that represent those views that are not only popular with Conservative voters in 2019, but hugely popular in his own party, then he could really play an important role in this election.
But it's vibes, Annunziata. This is what I'm saying. Boris Johnson in 2019 proposed levelling up. That was a bigger state. All Boris Johnson said about immigration in 2019 is that he wanted it to be lower, when in fact he made it higher. Boris Johnson also had in the 29 manifesto that he wanted to get rid of LGBT conversion therapy. He's not this small state social conservative that you say he is. So I don't understand what the appeal is to getting him back into frontline right-wing politics when actually many people would say he's not a conservative.
But one thing we haven't touched on is net zero, and Boris Johnson is clearly on the environmental side of the debate. However, he still gets votes from people who are not. And if he's not standing himself, but supporting Conservative candidates up and down the country who hold those views that are hugely popular with the British people, then he would play an important part.
So why shouldn't he stand in this election then, Annunziata? If he's a massive patriot and he, would help the Conservatives, why not stand now?
The same reason as Nigel Farage shouldn't and isn't, that you end up, as I've actually discussed with Nigel in the past, focusing all your energy on trying to get elected in one seat, when what you actually need to do, when you're that sort of figurehead, you're that kind of big character, is to make sure you're getting votes as widely as possible for lots of people to be elected, not just yourself. Should he then be put in the Lords and made chairman of the party? That's another question.
So do you think he would win this election if he were the party leader today, if he were still Prime Minister? Do you think he'd beat Keir Starmer?
I don't think that had the Tories not manipulated, or the MPs in Westminster not manipulated the system to kick him out, that we'd be in this current situation.
Yes, I mean, Benjamin, you were delighted to see the back of him, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, Boris Johnson is in the top 3 worst prime ministers of the last 5 years. But what I would ask you, Annunziata, is that you can't deny that he has this incredible gravitas and this way with words, as he illustrated in his Daily Mail column today, attacking Keir Starmer. Do you not think if he came back into the fray, if he goes out campaigning for the Tories, he kind of shows Rishi Sunak up as a bit of a dweeb, a bit of a pathetic leader compared?
I'm not entirely sure that Rishi Sunak needs anyone to show himself up. I think that he did a very successful job of doing that himself, sadly, as he, for example, announced the surprise election earlier this week, that it didn't go exactly well.
No.
But he is very clear, Rishi is very clear, that he is not a charismatic preacher-type leader. He's meant to be a pragmatist, a managerial type, a bit like when we had Theresa May. I can't say it's my style. It doesn't really appeal to me. I want a leader who's a leader, and I want the managers to be advising them and making sure things go smoothly. However, you do need both types of people in any party, and I think if they work together, it would be for the good of the whole country.
I think there's possibly a risk of overestimating Boris's appeal. Before he was ousted by the party, I think he was polling very badly, especially in red wall seats, which are the places that Conservatives would obviously love to keep hold of, which is very unlikely to happen. And also, circling back to immigration, OK, the ECHR, there's a debate over that as to what we can do about that and if it could help the government target illegal immigration. That's illegal immigration. We have record high legal immigration, which is a deliberate policy decision of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. So I find it difficult to believe that this is something that Boris Johnson would be able to do a very good job of defending if he was still leader of the Conservative Party and still Prime Minister.
You've obviously never seen Boris give a speech. It doesn't matter what the truth of the past might be. He is extremely good at spinning it as he wants it to be. That is one of his great skills. And I'm not saying it's necessarily an appealing one, but it's definitely a talent. And we do want as many talented politicians to be fighting for the Conservatives in this election as possible, because the alternative is that they are pretty much wiped out, that we end up with a Labour government that's in for not 5 years, but for far longer, giving it far more time to do huge amounts of damage, increase our taxes, drive towards net zero so that the cost of living crisis goes ever further out of control, making sure our borders are as porous as possible, because let's face it, the French haven't helped us so far, so why would they now, which seems to be the only platform they've got, scrapping all sorts of policies that could actually start to make things better. Now, we need to have the Conservative Party, as of the 4th of July, the 5th of July, in a position to regroup and fight back with good policies that reflect what the British people want.
All right, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, thank you very much for your time and your views there on Boris Johnson's return